Sufferings. All existence is characterized by suffering and does not bring satisfaction. There is no equivalent translation in English for the word dukkha in both Pali and Sanskrit. So the word dukkha is often translated as suffering. However, this English word is sometimes misleading because it connotes extreme pain. When the Buddha described our lives as dukkha, he was referring to any and all unsatisfactory conditions. These range from minor disappointments, problems and difficulties to intense pain and misery. Therefore, dukkha should be used to describe the fact that things are not completely right in our lives and could be better. Both dukkha, skt, or dukkha p are Sanskrit and Pali terms for suffering or unsatisfactoriness. This is the first of the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, which holds that cyclic existence is characterized by unsatisfactoriness or suffering. This is related to the idea that since the things of the world are transitory, beings are inevitably separated from what they desire and forced to endure what is unpleasant. The main stated goal of Buddhism from its inception is overcoming dukkha. There are three main types of dukkha. 1. The suffering of misery, dukkha dukkata, which includes physical and mental sufferings. 2. The suffering of change, viparinama dukkata, which includes all contaminated feelings of happiness. These are called sufferings because they are subject to change at any time, which leads to unhappiness. And 3. Compositional suffering, samskara dukkata, the suffering endemic to cyclic existence, in which sentient beings are prone to the dissatisfaction due to being under the influence of contaminated actions and afflictions. After the Great Enlightenment, the Buddha declared his first discourse at the Deer Park. Life is nothing but suffering, and the five aggregates are suffering. At other time in the Sarvasti, the Buddha repeated the same discourse. I will teach you, bhikkhus, pain, and the root of pain. Do you listen to it? And what, bhikkhus, is pain? Body, bhikkhus, is pain. Feeling is pain. Perception is pain. The activities are pain. And consciousness is pain. That, bhikkhus, is the meaning of pain. And what, bhikkhus, is the root of pain? It is this craving that leads downward to rebirth, along with the lure of lust that lingers longingly now here and there, namely, the craving for sense, the craving for rebirth, the craving to have done with rebirth. In other words, human being suffering is really the result of the arising of dependent origination, also the arising of the five aggregates. And thus, it is not the five aggregates, or human beings, and the world that cause suffering, but a person's craving for the five aggregates that causes suffering. The Buddha described three main characteristics of dukkha, which we face in our daily lives. First, the suffering of pain occurs whenever we are mentally or physically miserable. Physical suffering includes headaches and scraped knees as well as torment of cancer and heart attacks. Mental suffering occurs whenever we fail to get what we want, when we lose something we are attached to, or when misfortune comes our way. We are sad when our career goal cannot be achieved. We're depressed when we part from loved ones. We are anxious when we are waiting to obtain a letter from our children. Second, the suffering of change indicates that activities we generally regard as pleasurable in fact inevitably change and become painful. When we first buy a new shirt, we like it because it looked gorgeous. However, 3 years later, we may be suffering or feeling uncomfortable when we wear it because it is old and becomes worn out. No matter how much we like a person and we feel happy when we are with that person. However, when we spend too much time with that person, it makes us uncomfortable. Thus, happiness was never inherent in the person we like, but was a product of the interaction between us and that person. Third, the pervasive compounded suffering refers to our situation of having bodies and minds prone to pain. We can become miserable simply by the changing of external conditions. The weather changes and our bodies suffer from the cold. How a friend treats us changes, and we become depressed. Our present bodies and minds compound our misery in the sense that they are the basis for our present problems. Our present bodies are the basis upon which we experience bad health. If we did not have a body that was receptive to pain, we would not fall ill no matter how many viruses and germs we were exposed to. Our present minds are the basis upon which we experience the pain and hurt feelings. If we had minds that were not contaminated by anger, then we would not suffer from the mental anguish of conflict with others. In Buddhism, there are 2 categories of sufferings: physical and mental sufferings. Sufferings from within, such as sickness or sorrow. First, physical sufferings, or sufferings caused by diseases, including the suffering of birth, old age, sickness, and death. The suffering of the body means that our body is not only impure, it is subject to birth, old age, disease, and death, as well as to heat and cold, hunger and thirst, and other hardships that cause us to suffer, preventing us from being free and happy. Yes, indeed, birth is inevitably suffering for both the mother and the infant. And because it is from birth, other forms of suffering, such as old age, sickness, and death inevitably follow. Physical suffering takes many forms. People must have observed, at one time or another, how their aged relatives suffer. Most of them suffer aches and pains in their joints, and many find it hard to move about by themselves. With advancing age, the elderly find life difficult because they cannot see, hear, or eat properly. The pain of disease, which strikes young and old alike, can be unbearable. The pain of death brings much suffering. Even the moment of birth gives pain, both to the mother and the child who is born. The truth is that the suffering of birth, old age, sickness, and death are unavoidable. Some fortunate people may now be enjoying happy and carefree lives, but it is only a matter of time before they too will experience suffering. What is worse, nobody else can share this suffering with the one that suffers. For example, a man may be very concerned that his mother is growing old, yet he cannot take her place and suffer the pain of aging on her behalf. Also, if a boy falls very ill, his mother cannot experience the discomfort of his illness for him. Finally, neither mother nor son can help each other when the moment of death comes. Second, the mental sufferings, or the sufferings of the mind. Besides physical suffering, there are also various forms of mental suffering. Mental suffering such as sadness, distress, jealousy, bitterness, unsatisfaction, unhappiness. People feel sad, lonely, or depressed when they lose someone they love through separation or death. They become irritated or uncomfortable when they are forced to be in the company of those whom they dislike, or those who are unpleasant. People also suffer when they are unable to satisfy their needs and wants. The suffering of the mind means that when the mind is afflicted, it is necessarily consumed by the fire of afflictions, bound by the ropes of afflictions, struck, pursued and ordered about by the whip of afflictions, defiled and obscured by the smoke and dust of afflictions. Thus, whoever develops afflictions is lacking in wisdom, because the first person he has cause to suffer is himself. Besides, there is also the suffering of the environment. The suffering of the environment means that this earth is subject to the vagaries of the weather, scorching heat, frigid cold and pouring rain, while sentient beings must toil and suffer day in and day out to earn a living. Tragedies occur every day before our very eyes. In this world, worries and miseries are twin evils that go hand in hand. They coexist in this world. If you feel worried, you are miserable, and vice versa. When you are miserable, you are worried. Devout Buddhists should always remember that worries are made by our own minds, and by nothing else. We create them in our own minds, for we fail to understand the danger of attachment and egoistic feelings. To be able to overcome these problems, we must try to contemplate and to train our minds carefully, because an untrained mind is the main cause of all the problems, including worries and miseries. The most important fact is that we should always have a smile for ourselves, as well as for others in any circumstances. The Buddha taught, worries only arise in the fool, not in the wise. Worries and miseries are nothing but states of mind. Negative thoughts produce worries and miseries, while positive thoughts produce happiness and peace. The Buddha teaches that suffering is everywhere. Suffering is already enclosed in the cause. Suffering from the effect. Suffering throughout time. Suffering pervades space. And suffering governs both normal people and saint. From internal sufferings to external sufferings. Internal sufferings include both physical and mental sufferings. Physical sufferings are sufferings from within, such as sickness or sorrow. Mental sufferings are spiritual sufferings, such as sadness, distress, jealousy, bitterness, unsatisfaction, unhappiness. External sufferings include sufferings from outside. Circumstances such as calamities, wars. The Buddha said that whatever is impermanent is suffering, because although impermanence is not a cause for suffering, it creates occasions for suffering. For not understanding of impermanence, we crave and cling to objects in the hope that they may be permanent, that they may yield permanent happiness. Failing to understand that youth, health, and life itself are impermanent, we crave them and cling to them. We desperately hold on to our youth and try to prolong our life. Yet because they are impermanent by nature, they keep changing rapidly, and we will surely one day become old and sick. When this occurs, impermanence is the main agent which creates occasions for suffering. According to the connected discourses of the Buddha, Chapter Esanavago, Searches, there are three aspects of dukkha that all sentient beings experience. They are suffering due to pain, suffering due to change, and suffering due to formations. First, dukkha as ordinary suffering, or suffering due to pain, or suffering that produced by direct causes, or suffering of misery, including physical suffering such as pain, old age, death, as well as mental anxieties. The suffering within suffering is experienced when people do not have a place to live, clothes to keep out the cold or heat, or food to eat to survive. Dukkha is produced by change, or suffering due to change, or suffering by loss or deprivation or change. For example, people who are rich, who have a good life, but then a sudden fire burns up all their property, leaving them destitute. Or maybe they die in a plane crash, or a shipwreck. These are the sufferings of decay. Third, dukkha as conditioned states, or suffering due to formations, or suffering by the passing or impermanency of all things. Body and mind are impermanent. Everybody of us experiences childhood, young days of life, then grows old and dies. Our thoughts flow on in a continuous succession, and we cannot control them. When we grow old, our eyes get blurry, our ears become deaf, and our hands and feet are no longer nimble, but start to tremble. These are the sufferings of process. The Buddha's teaching on suffering, above all, offers a solution to the fundamental problem of the human condition. According to Buddhism, human existence is distinguished by the fact that nothing is permanent. No happiness will last forever. And whatever else there is, there will always be suffering and death. The first step in the Buddhist path to awakening is to recognize this as the foremost problem of human existence, to see that all is dukkha. However, this is not a pessimistic observation, because while acknowledging the ubiquity of dukkha, Buddhism offers a solution in the form of the path leading to the cessation of dukkha. The Buddha himself characterized his teaching by saying, "I teach only dukkha, and the cessation of dukkha." Dukkha can be experienced in three ways. The first is simply the ordinary suffering that affects people when the body is in pain. Ordinary suffering is also mental pain. It is the grief of not getting what one wants, or the distress caused by separation from loved ones, or from pleasant conditions. It is also the many other painful situations that one inevitably encounters by virtue of being born, aging and dying. Underlying any happiness is the knowledge that whenever there is pleasure or delight, it will not be permanent. Sooner or later the vicissitudes of life will bring about a change. There is a Buddhist saying that even in laughter there is dukkha, because all laughter is impermanent. This instability underlies the second kind of dukkha, which is dissatisfaction arising from change. It might seem that only death can bring about the cessation of suffering, but in fact death is also a form of suffering. In Buddhism, the cosmos extends far beyond the immediate physical world perceptible by the senses, and death is merely part of the endless cycle of rebirth. Death in itself offers no respite, because actions have consequences in future, lives far beyond death, just as deeds from previous lives have affected the present. The third kind of suffering is the inherent interconnectedness of actions and deeds, which exceeds human vision and experience. In this sense, suffering applies to the universe in its totality, and no imaginable beings, humans, gods, demons, animals or hell beings, are exempt from it. Suffering thus refers not only to everyday suffering, but also to the whole infinite world of possible and seemingly endless forms of suffering. No simple translation can capture its full significance. The goal of Buddhism is the complete and final cessation of every form of dukkha, and thereby the attainment of nirvana, the eradication of greed, hatred and delusion, which ties beings to the cycle of rebirth. Accordingly, Buddhas and those who reach enlightenment do not experience dukkha, because strictly speaking they are not beings, nor do they roll in the samsara. They will never again be reborn. Dukkha characterizes the cosmos as a whole, but its predominance varies among the different spheres of existence. In the world of pure form, where the great gods dwell, there is less suffering than in the world of sense desire, inhabited by lesser gods, humans and other beings. Just the Buddha, when he walked the earth, could enter the world of the sense desire. So too can humans enter the world of pure form. This is ordinarily accomplished in meditation, through different kinds of absorptions, dhyana. The characteristic form of suffering in this situation is impermanence, caused by the meditator's inability to remain eternally in trance. To attain more abiding happiness, an individual must strive to understand the processes that govern movement in the cosmos as a whole, namely, rebirth and karma, and how they can be affected